In a vast, distant galaxy, high above Earth, a fleet of alien ships hovered like silent shadows against the starry expanse. Their mission was clear: observe humanity, assess their weaknesses, and determine how to exploit them. The alien generals, leaders of one of the most powerful and technologically advanced species in the universe, had always scoffed at humanity's reputation. They saw humans as primitive and fragile, their planet a mere speck in the vastness of space. However, they had never underestimated the importance of thorough research. And so, they watched the planet below with detached interest. This time, however, they were witnessing something extraordinary, an event unlike anything they had seen before. On the ground, far below in a remote training facility, human children, no older than 15, were about to face their greatest challenge yet. The challenge was simple in concept. A simulation designed to test their response to danger. A seemingly impossible situation. No one, not even the human commanders, expected any of the children to survive unscathed. To the alien generals, it was a cruel joke. How could these fragile beings possibly overcome such odds? They would fall. It was inevitable. But what the aliens did not anticipate was the sheer audacity of human nature. In the center of the training grounds, a group of children stood, all around the same age, their faces a mix of excitement, fear, and determination. Their instructors, tough, no-nonsense military personnel, had briefed them on the stakes, but the children were undeterred. They were used to danger, accustomed to facing obstacles that many adults would crumble under. Their mission was clear: navigate a series of life-threatening situations, traps, illusions, physical challenges, all designed to test their limits. Failure meant certain death. For the alien generals, watching from their command ships, the scene below was nothing more than a spectacle. They chuckled among themselves, certain that this test would be an easy win for their superiority. What could these children possibly know about real danger? General Jorek sneered, his voice filled with a cold, dismissive tone. They are merely tools of their species, replied Zalra, another general, her eyes fixed on the monitors displaying the children's every move. This will be an easy test. Their fragile bodies will falter. I have no doubt about it. The alien fleet watched in silence as the children began their first challenge, navigating through a dark, twisting labyrinth filled with deadly traps. The air was thick with tension, the children's every step watched closely. The generals were certain that fear would soon take hold of them, that they would freeze, make mistakes, and fall victim to the overwhelming odds. Yet, as the minutes passed, the unexpected happened. Instead of crumbling under pressure, the children moved with calculated precision. They communicated silently with one another, sharing quick glances and nods as they avoided traps, worked together to disable barriers, and moved forward with a calm resolve that defied the danger around them. From above, the generals could only watch in stunned silence. How could this be? These were children, not battle-hardened soldiers. How were they doing this? The simulations were designed to overwhelm even the most experienced warriors. A loud beep echoed through the ship as one of the children, a young girl, defused a deadly trap that should have taken them all out. The aliens were in disbelief. They could only stare at the monitors, unable to comprehend how these kids were so composed, so focused, despite the terrifying danger all around them. Impossible, General Jorek muttered under his breath. His arrogance was quickly replaced with uncertainty. Are we missing something? Zalra's eyes narrowed, as if she were looking through the very fabric of reality itself. She had expected these children to falter at the first sign of adversity, but they were succeeding, and not just surviving, they were thriving. Her mind raced, trying to understand what she was seeing. Were these children more than they appeared? Or was humanity's potential greater than they had given credit for? Just as the generals began to question everything they thought they knew about humanity, a new test emerged. The children, unaware of the growing doubts in the alien fleet above them, pressed forward into a new phase, one that involved a more complicated set of challenges. The stakes were higher now, the obstacles deadlier. The final challenge, a test of physical endurance and emotional fortitude, began to take shape. It was no longer just about survival, it was about the human spirit, the ability to rise above fear and push forward in the face of overwhelming odds. The children's bodies would be pushed to their limits, but it was their minds, their courage, that would define their success. The generals, once smug in their certainty that they would see human failure, were now filled with a growing unease. As the children tackled their next obstacle, a race against time involving complex decision-making and physical feats, they couldn't help but feel that this test was somehow slipping out of their control. "Perhaps we've miscalculated," Zalra muttered, staring at the monitor, a flicker of respect and concern in her voice. Then, in an instant, the most unexpected thing happened. A young boy, no older than 12, found himself facing a choice between saving a teammate and continuing toward the finish line. His body was exhausted, his mind racing from the physical toll of the exercise, but in that moment, he did something no one expected. He chose to help his teammate. A smile of pure determination spread across his face as he pulled the injured child to safety, despite the looming danger. And just like that, in the blink of an eye, the aliens realized something. This wasn't about strength or weaponry. This was about something far deeper. Humanity's true strength was not in its technology or its power, it was in its heart, its will to fight for one another, to never give up, no matter the cost. The generals, for the first time, found themselves questioning everything they had believed about humanity. What kind of beings were these humans? What made them so different? They were beginning to realize they had been wrong all along. The tension on the alien ships was palpable. The generals, who had spent centuries conquering worlds, were beginning to feel a sense of unease that they had never experienced before. They were seasoned warriors, leaders of a race that had crushed countless civilizations under their boots. Yet, what they were witnessing on Earth was something entirely new. Something they couldn't understand. These human children weren't just surviving, they were thriving in the face of danger, displaying a resilience the alien generals had never thought possible for a species so primitive. Zalra stood in front of the massive holographic screens, her sharp eyes fixed on the children below. The labyrinth challenge was over, and now the children were preparing for the next test, an endurance race across a deadly, obstacle-laden terrain. Her mind raced. How were they doing this? The simulations had been designed to overwhelm them, to ensure they would fail. But the children kept moving forward, cooperating, thinking as a team. "You're seeing what I'm seeing, right?" General Jorik asked, his voice a mixture of frustration and reluctant admiration. Zalra nodded, her arms crossed. "I am. And it doesn't make sense. We've run tests like this on other species, other planets. There's always a breaking point, where their fear, their weakness, overwhelms them. These humans, they don't break. They bend, but they don't break." Jorik shook his head in disbelief. "What makes them so different? Why aren't they falling apart like every other race we've encountered?" Zalra turned away from the screens and walked toward the edge of the command center, her mind still spinning with questions. For the first time, she felt an unfamiliar sensation, a stirring of uncertainty. She had prided herself on her ability to predict outcomes, to manipulate situations, but this was different. These children were defying logic, defying what the generals had believed was absolute. Meanwhile, on the ground below, the children were entering the final leg of their challenge. They were tired, physically drained, with cuts and bruises from the obstacles they had faced. But their spirits were high. There was a fire in their eyes, a sense of purpose that refused to be extinguished. They weren't fighting for victory, they were fighting for each other. They were fighting because they knew they had to. The alien generals had underestimated them. The children were not merely surviving their trials, they were learning from them. With every failure, they adjusted, adapted, and became stronger. The teamwork was seamless, their communication without words, each child instinctively understanding what needed to be done. One of the children, a boy who had earlier saved his injured teammate, was now helping a girl who had stumbled during the race. Without hesitation, he pulled her to her feet and steadied her, whispering encouragements in a calm, measured tone. The generals, still watching through their monitors, saw the boy's actions and felt a growing unease. To the alien generals, sacrifice was a weakness. To give of yourself, to risk your life for another, was something that went against the very essence of survival. But to these humans, it seemed to be their greatest strength. They were not just surviving, they were thriving because they cared for each other, because they understood the power of unity. Jorek clenched his fists. What is it about them? What is this strength? It's not just physical. It's something deeper. Zalra sighed. It's their spirit. Their resolve. It's unlike anything we've encountered before. The race continued. The children were nearing the final stretch, but there was one last obstacle, an illusion that would push them to the edge of their fears. The ground beneath them began to shake, and the sky darkened, clouds swirling ominously above them. The children couldn't see it, but the alien generals knew what it was, a trap designed to test their courage. An overwhelming sense of dread began to fill the air. The children could feel it, but they kept moving forward, pushing through the fear. In the face of uncertainty, they did not hesitate. One by one, the children crossed the finish line, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and elation. They had done it. They had conquered every obstacle, every test, and emerged stronger for it. The generals watched in stunned silence. It wasn't just that the children had survived, they had faced what most would call impossible challenges and come through victorious. But it was the way they did it, the way they supported one another, the way they adapted, the way they never gave up, that truly shook the alien commanders to their core. This isn't just a physical test, Zalra whispered, a note of awe in her voice. It's a test of everything they are. Jorek nodded slowly, his arrogance now replaced by something else, respect. Maybe we've misjudged them. Perhaps there's more to these humans than we thought. The implications of what they had just witnessed were profound. The generals, once confident in their superiority, now realized that humanity was unlike any species they had ever encountered. These humans had not just passed the test, they had redefined what it meant to be strong. Their strength wasn't just in their bodies, but in their hearts. The generals had come to Earth to measure the fragility of humanity. What they didn't expect was to discover the unbreakable spirit that lay within them. After the conclusion of the trials, Zalra and the other generals convened in the war room. The mood was tense. They had not expected the outcome of the human challenge to shake them so thoroughly. What was supposed to be an easy victory, a mere display of their superiority over a primitive species, had instead turned into an unsettling revelation. The human children had shown resilience, courage, and an unwillingness to back down in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. Zalra leaned against the table, her arms folded tightly across her chest. I don't understand it. Why didn't they break? Why did they keep fighting for each other? General Vorn, a seasoned commander known for his brutal tactics, scowled as he scrolled through the footage of the trials. It's not like they had a choice. We set the stakes high, made it impossible for them to win. What should have been a test of survival became something else. They didn't just fight for survival, they fought for each other. A cold silence followed Vorn's words. Jorek, usually the most pragmatic among them, sat back in his chair, his fingers pressed to his temple as if in deep thought. We've seen these kinds of displays of unity before, among weaker species. But this is different. They did not hesitate. The moment they were in danger, they acted instinctively to protect one another. They didn't act like children. They acted like warriors. Zalra's eyes narrowed. But there's something more. These humans, they're not just motivated by fear. Fear drives them, yes, but they channel it differently. They don't shrink from it. They use it. The generals exchanged glances, the realization slowly sinking in, humans were more than they had imagined. Meanwhile, on Earth, the children who had participated in the trials were back at their homes, recovering from their physically demanding ordeal. Though tired, they carried with them the knowledge that they had overcome something truly remarkable, an experience that had bound them together in a way they could never have imagined before. They had formed a bond that transcended mere survival. It was a connection born of shared struggle and triumph. The boy who had helped his teammate, the one who had carried her to the finish line, sat quietly in his room, staring at a small trinket he had kept from the trials, a simple necklace given to him by the girl he had saved. It was a symbol of the challenge, yes, but more than that, it was a reminder of how far they had come, how far they had pushed themselves. In the quiet of his room, the boy smiled to himself. But it wasn't a smile of pride, it was one of deep reflection. He had always known he was capable of more, but now he was sure. This experience had shown him something. Strength was not just about surviving the hardest trials. It was about never giving up, no matter the circumstances. It was about being there for others, even when the odds were stacked against you. Back in the war room, Zalra turned her attention back to the flickering screens in front of her. The footage was playing again, images of the children in the final stages of their trials. The emotions were raw, their faces etched with exhaustion, but there was something in their eyes that disturbed her. It was the same thing she had seen in the eyes of many who had been broken in battle, defiance. They weren't just fighting for victory. They were fighting for something more, she said softly. We may have underestimated them, but what if this? What if their resilience is their weapon? What if they can use it against us? General Vorn sneered, but there was uncertainty in his gaze. You think they could fight us? They're nothing but children. Zalra's gaze remained steady, unwavering. You saw what they did on that field. If they can fight with that kind of heart, that kind of determination, they are a threat. We have to reassess our approach. These children aren't just children, they're a symbol of everything we didn't expect to face here. The generals were quiet, the weight of Zalra's words sinking in. This wasn't just about the human race, it was about what they stood for. They represented something far more dangerous than their small, fragile bodies suggested. They were driven by something that couldn't be measured by strength or intelligence alone, willpower. A willpower that refused to bow. The next day, Zalra made a decision. A dangerous decision. She had spent enough time analyzing humanity's potential, their capacity for defiance, and their ability to come together in times of crisis. She realized that to truly understand them, to break them, they would need to experience something they never had before. They would need to be shown what true power was. But there was a twist. She ordered the next phase of the trial to be altered, not only for the children but for the adults as well. The alien forces would no longer hold back. They would strike Earth's most vulnerable points, not to destroy it, but to push humanity to its absolute breaking point. The message was clear: either they would surrender, or they would face a war unlike any they had ever known. For the first time in their history, the aliens were preparing to test humanity in a way that could change the course of the galaxy forever. The days following the new orders were filled with tense anticipation. Zalra's decision had set the stage for something monumental. The first wave of alien forces, though not lethal, would strike Earth's key cities, locations that would deliver a psychological blow rather than a physical one. Strategic attacks on communication centers, vital infrastructure, and crucial military bases were underway. It wasn't meant to devastate, it was meant to force humanity's hand. The humans would be made to choose: submit to the overwhelming force of the alien invaders or fight back with everything they had left. Zalra had calculated this carefully: humans were not conquerable by sheer force alone. They needed to be pushed to the edge of desperation. On Earth, the news spread like wildfire. The first attacks hit major cities, television stations went dark, power grids faltered, and major government hubs were breached. But it wasn't the destruction that affected people the most. It was the sudden realization that the aliens had come, not with an army to crush them, but with an unspoken message: you are vulnerable, and you will bow. People who had been living their lives without a second thought now saw everything around them unraveling. Their world wasn't as safe as it once had been. There was an air of disbelief at first, as if the attacks were a nightmare no one could wake from. But as the days passed and the intensity of the strikes grew, panic began to set in. The fear was palpable. But in the midst of the chaos, the children who had been part of the trial, the ones who had faced their own trials, began to stir. They had felt something shift within themselves during those trials. A sense of unity, courage, and strength that they couldn't explain, but knew was there. They had learned to trust each other, to lean on each other when the pressure became too great. And now, they would learn to do the same for their world. Zulrah watched the unfolding events from her ship's command center, her eyes glued to the screens. The humans were struggling to keep up, their cities collapsing, their resources dwindling, and yet, there was no sign of them surrendering. Instead, they were pulling together. She had expected them to crumble. She had expected them to break under pressure. But what she hadn't accounted for was the power of the human spirit. This was a species that had endured hardships, wars, natural disasters, personal loss, and suffering, and yet, each time they had been knocked down, they had gotten back up. They had a resilience she had never seen before. A will to survive that refused to be extinguished. Across the globe, individuals, families, and communities were coming together. It wasn't just the militaries or world governments that rose up, it was every person who had ever faced adversity and conquered it. The children, those very same ones who had been tested in the alien trials, were stepping up as well. Their experiences in the trials had awakened something in them, a belief that they had more strength than they had ever imagined. They were no longer afraid of the challenges before them. In one city, a group of children gathered in the town square, their eyes filled with determination. They weren't just looking for a way to survive the invasion, they were looking for a way to win. Together, they had learned something invaluable during the trials: fear was a tool, not an obstacle. It was time to use it. One of the boys who had been part of the alien challenge stood at the front of the group, his voice carrying above the murmurs of those around him. We can't let them break us. They want us to surrender. But that's not who we are. We'll fight. We'll fight for our families, for our world. Together. The crowd erupted in cheers, the sound of their resolve filling the air. Their collective strength was undeniable. And it wasn't just the children. Adults, too, were finding their courage again. People who had been living in fear were now inspired to act, not because of the strength of their governments or armies, but because of the strength of their shared humanity. Back in the war room, Zulrah sat in stunned silence as she watched the broadcast from Earth. The response from humanity was unlike anything she had anticipated. They weren't surrendering. They weren't breaking. They were rising. She could see it in their eyes, the same defiance she had seen in the children during the trials. They're not just surviving. They're fighting, Zulrah murmured under her breath, disbelief coloring her voice. General Vorn, who had been standing with his arms crossed, spoke up. This wasn't supposed to happen. They were supposed to be broken. Why are they standing strong? Jorek, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke, his tone heavy with realization. Because they believe. They believe in each other. They believe in their ability to overcome. Zulrah's mind raced. If this was the strength that humanity was capable of, then this war would not be as easy as they had thought. But there was one thing she knew for certain now: they could never simply crush humanity. They would have to outsmart them. And to do that, they would need to understand them on a deeper level. Back on Earth, as the days wore on, the children who had once faced alien trials were now leading the charge. Their newfound confidence and courage had inspired adults and fellow children alike. They formed small groups, moving between cities, offering help where it was needed most. They were no longer just kids, they were leaders, warriors in their own right. The tides of war were shifting. The first signs of resistance had begun to show promise, but there was still a long road ahead. Humanity had learned not just to survive but to fight. They weren't just huddling in the remnants of their cities anymore, they were pushing back. Their weapons were rudimentary, their resources scarce, but their hearts were strong. And now, thanks to the children's resilience and the unexpected unity that followed, Earth had begun to see something that Zulrah never thought would come: organized rebellion. The alien invaders were more than surprised, they were beginning to feel threatened. Zulrah watched from her ship's observation deck as her forces faced the human resistance, a sight she had never anticipated. There was an intensity to the humans that defied the cold calculations she had relied on. Even their children, who had been part of the trial, were organizing in ways she hadn't thought possible. One such child, the girl who had suggested taking the fight to the aliens, had become the leader of a growing human faction. She was no longer the frail, unsure individual she had been during the trials. She had grown stronger, not just physically, but mentally. She now stood at the forefront of a new movement, one that was rapidly spreading across the world. Her idea had become the foundation of humanity's rebellion. Her plan was as brilliant as it was simple: disrupt the aliens' communication network. By severing their lines of communication, they could stall the invaders' advances and buy Earth the time it needed to regroup and mount a proper defense. The humans had learned, after all, that when faced with seemingly insurmountable odds, they were at their best when they worked together. And so they did. In a darkened room deep beneath the remains of a once proud city, a team of children sat around a hastily drawn map, plotting their next move. They weren't just children anymore, they were strategists, leaders, warriors. The girl who had started it all now stood at the head of the group, her voice steady and resolute. "We attack tonight. It's our best chance. We hit their command center, disrupt their communications, and cripple their ability to coordinate. The adults are counting on us, and the world is counting on us." There was no hesitation. The children moved swiftly, their movements as calculated as any well-trained soldiers. They had trained for this moment, not just physically, but emotionally. They had learned to take risks and face fear head-on. Each child had something to prove, not just to the aliens, but to themselves. The night air was thick with tension as the young rebels infiltrated the heart of the alien stronghold. They moved in silence, their footsteps echoing only in their minds as they navigated through corridors that once would have made them tremble. But now, they walked with purpose. Every step was a declaration, every move a refusal to submit. The alien soldiers guarding the communication hubs were unsuspecting, their vigilance dulled by overconfidence. They had never imagined that children could pose such a threat. But this was no ordinary group of children. They were the embodiment of everything Zulrah had underestimated: the collective strength of humanity's spirit, the belief in one another, and the power of courage in the face of the unknown. At the same time, back on Zulrah's ship, the tension was palpable. She could sense something was changing in the atmosphere, but she didn't know exactly what. It was a slight disturbance, an anomaly in her soldiers' reports. The resistance was stronger than expected, and there were rumors of human factions working together, something that shouldn't have been possible given their fragmented world. Zulrah stood before her team of strategists, her voice calm but filled with a simmering fury. "What's happening? Why haven't we crushed them yet? Why are they still fighting?" One of her generals spoke up, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "We underestimated their unity, Zulrah. They are fighting together now, in ways we didn't anticipate. We thought it would take years for them to organize, but they've turned desperation into determination. They're children, they've learned how to lead. It's something we've never seen before." Zulrah's brow furrowed. "Then we adapt. They want to play games? We'll show them what a real game is. But no more underestimating them. Back on Earth, the children's mission was progressing. They reached the communication hub without encountering serious resistance. They knew they had limited time. The alien response would come soon, and they had to strike before the invaders realized what was happening. The girl, now leading the charge, placed her hand on the control panel. With a few keystrokes, she initiated the sequence to sever the alien communication network. A moment of pure silence passed, and then the lights flickered. The walls shook. The alien hub began to glitch, its once dominant control systems failing. It was working. The humans, children and adults alike, cheered from their makeshift command posts. Earth had just taken a major step toward pushing back the invaders. The alien forces, for the first time in days, were vulnerable. Their lines of communication had been broken, and they were scrambling to regain control. But Zalra wasn't one to let a setback deter her. Watching the chaos unfold before her eyes, she knew this wasn't the end of the battle. This was only the beginning. The humans had proven their resourcefulness. Now, she would prove hers. The rebel children, hearts pounding, knew their victory had only bought Earth a little time. The next step would be harder. Zalra would not back down easily. But for now, they had struck a blow, and it was enough to give Earth hope. But there was one thing that Zalra still could not grasp. No matter what humanity faced, no matter the odds, they always managed to bounce back. And in the most unlikely of places, they always found strength in their weakest. The alien generals had underestimated humanity, and they would soon come to regret it. The days following the communication blackout were a blur of activity. The invaders were no longer as confident as they had been, and the children's mission had sparked a fire of resistance that spread far and wide. But in the heart of the human alliance, there was still a feeling of uncertainty. Could they truly win this war? Could humanity, in all its fragility, stand up against an alien empire that had crushed civilizations far more advanced than Earth? Zalra had regrouped her forces, but she was now more cautious, more aware of the unpredictable nature of humanity's will to survive. She had learned one hard lesson: never underestimate them. The children, especially, had proven to be an unexpected variable. They had broken the communication system, yes, but that was only the beginning. She had no doubt they would attempt even bolder strikes next. The rebellion was growing, and Earth was no longer just a battleground, it was a symbol. In a makeshift command center deep within the ruins of a former capital, the girl who had led the children's first strike now stood at the front of a group of resistance leaders. The once quiet child was now a full-fledged commander. Her face was set in determination, but there was a weight in her eyes, a knowledge of how much was still at stake. "We've done well so far," she began, her voice steady yet filled with the gravity of their situation. "But we're still a long way from winning this war. We've broken their communications, but they have more resources than we can count. We can't just sit back and wait for them to make the next move. We need to take the fight to them." Her words echoed in the room, and every face turned toward her, nodding in agreement. This wasn't just a group of children anymore, this was a coalition of humans, young and old, willing to risk everything to save their home. "We'll move at dawn," she continued. "Our target, the Central Command base. If we can take that out, we cripple their entire operation." As the resistance prepared for the mission, Zalra's forces were growing restless. They knew the humans were planning something, they could feel it in the air. But Zalra had a new strategy: divide and conquer. She would send a strike force to disrupt the human factions' communication and make them doubt each other. If she could weaken the unity among them, she knew the battle would turn in her favor. The final clash was coming. The lines were drawn, and the humans had shown they were no longer just desperate survivors, they were fighters. But Zalra had a few tricks left up her sleeve. The night before the assault, the girl and her team gathered one last time. The weight of the mission hung heavily on their shoulders, but there was a sense of resolve in the air. They were no longer just fighting for survival, they were fighting for a future. "We've come this far," she said, glancing around at the faces of the children who had become her comrades. "We may be young, but we're the reason humanity still has hope. Tomorrow, we finish what we started. This is for everyone we've lost. For our families. For our future." She didn't need to say more. The group stood in silence, their eyes meeting hers, before nodding in unison. They were ready. At dawn, the assault began. The children, along with the adult fighters who had rallied to their cause, moved swiftly through the ruins of their once proud cities. They navigated the war-torn landscape with precision, their every step calculated, their focus unwavering. They knew that every second mattered. The aliens would soon realize their mistake. They had thought Earth was just another easy conquest, but they were wrong. The alien forces, still scrambling to regain their hold on Earth, had underestimated humanity's resolve. The girl and her team reached the alien command center first. It was heavily fortified, but the resistance had learned from their past victories. They didn't need overwhelming firepower. They needed precision. With the aid of their homemade explosives and their makeshift hacking tools, the team infiltrated the command center, bypassing the alien security systems with surprising ease. It was clear the aliens hadn't expected human ingenuity to be so effective. But time was running out. The countdown was already underway. Zalra had initiated a retaliatory strike, planning to wipe out the human resistance in one fell swoop once she realized what was happening. The girl knew they had to finish the mission before that happened. The moments before the detonation were filled with anticipation and anxiety. The team moved quickly, planting explosives in critical points, ensuring that no part of the alien base would survive. Then, just as they were about to make their escape, disaster struck. The aliens had discovered their presence. The command center was swarming with soldiers. It was a race against time. The girl turned to the others. "We have no choice now. We finish it. Go." The team scattered, setting off the explosives in different parts of the base. The explosions rang out like thunder, shaking the ground beneath them. As the command center erupted in flames, the girl felt a strange mix of triumph and sorrow. They had done it. They had struck a blow against the invaders. But at what cost? Back on Zalra's ship, she watched the chaos unfold on her screens. The central command base was gone, and Earth's resistance had grown even stronger. She could feel the tide turning. Humanity wasn't just surviving, they were fighting back. But there was still time. There was still hope for victory. "I will not lose to these humans," Zalra said, her voice filled with determination. "We will adapt. We will strike harder. Earth will be ours." As the dust settled over the fallen alien base, the resistance emerged victorious. The central command center was in ruins, and the aliens were reeling from the blow. Humanity had achieved something remarkable, but the war was far from over. The true battle was yet to come.